Okay, so what I want to try to do, which is going to be very difficult to do, is I want to try to discuss my legend of the Beaver Dam Atlantis. So, if I look up the Beaver Dam Atlantis, there are no tales. So, as far as I can tell, with my limited ability of searching the internet, there is no legend of the Beaver Dam Atlantis. So, basically, the concept is that, um, much like today, people are building beaver dam analogs. So beavers make wetlands, and these wetlands are ecologically important and ecologically impactful. And one problem is that there aren't any beavers making enough wetlands, and this is devastating. And so, in the modern era, people are building the beaver dams instead of the beavers building them, just to try to recover some wetlands in a more natural way, so that beavers can actually come back as part of the plan too, to these wetlands that are created by the man-made beaver dams or beaver dam analogs, and start to kind of recover the natural ecological environment that will be improving the environmental sustainability of the particular area that the dam was built. So beaver dam analogs are this whole thing, and there's people building them, and it's a real thing, and it's because beaver dams are so important. Okay, so another thing is beaver dams, and early human development. So some of the terms that you might find discussed is the early and middle Holocene. So beaver dams in the Holocene. So the Holocene is an epoch like the Pleistocene, and the Jurassic, and the Holocene is what we are in right now. Then it started at the end of the last ice age, and so the Holocene epoch saw the extinction of a bunch of giant animals like the big elephants, the woolly mammoths, and all those different bears, and all those different other giant animals. But for humans to develop into the dominant infrastructure building animal that they are today, there is the suggestion that beaver dams were an important part of their environment, because the beaver dam makes a big old wetland, and then this wetland is very resource rich. So there's a lot of rodents that can live in these wetlands, and you can hunt them. And there's a lot of plants that live in these wetlands, like rice, wild rice, and you can eat them and grow these, and cultivate even, or just take advantage of the natural environment and just harvest them, forage. And beaver dams make for very wealthy foraging societies, basically, is the suggestion. So people in the early to mid Holocene flourished as a result of beaver dams. So what you don't see in any of these discussions is whether or not people built their own beaver dams or expanded on beaver dams because they knew that they were so useful. So my fantasy tale, The Legend of Beaver Dam Atlantis, is basically based on the concept that people at the end of the Ice Age did build a bunch of giant beaver dam analogs in other parts of the world where there aren't even beavers, and this resulted in a society of a culture of paradise where people had everything that they wanted and ever needed nothing. They had so much plenty, but the problem is that beaver dams need a lot of maintenance. They don't really last. And beavers don't actually dam up everything. But the humans dammed up everything. And they made so many more wetlands that their maintenance was far beyond the ability of them to keep up with it. And the result is that the beaver dams collapsed, and a huge region of human society got wiped out in a massive flood on the scale of the kind of flood myths that people always want to talk about, like biblical scale floods. But instead of like a giant wave, it would be like if a great lake washed out an entire river valley that was just full of people living with nothing but from the sea to the Great Lake, terrace upon terrace of beaver dams. So we can see these pictures right here that, the beaver dam makes like a water terrace, and so the water's at this height, and then there's a beaver dam, and then the water's at this height. And so you can actually imagine that if people were building these things on purpose, then there could be one right after the other. I mean, there could be another dam and another dam and another dam and another dam, all the way down the from the very top of the valley all the way down the valley to where the delta are meeting the ocean. And there could just be this extensive networks of beaver dams with these extensive networks of interconnected wetlands that are basically terraces. And that if something happened way upstream and maybe a dam broke enough, maybe there tons of rain or something happened where the water caused some dams to fail farther upstream, then this flooding would cascade down the valley, destroying every dam from where the Great Lake was spilling out to the very ocean. And so the legend of Beaver Dam Atlantis would be that there was this magical paradise of people living in these aquatic environments where they had everything and unlimited food and never wanting anything, and you had to probably watch out for the crocodiles. But I mean, other than that, there was, society could go on forever and have everything, but you had to live like a special lifestyle of constantly rebuilding these dams by always putting more sticks into the dam and stuff like that. And then as technology kind of advanced, more people were less interested in living this lifestyle of constantly being a beaver and constantly building the dam. Then the dams would have fallen into some state of disrepair, and eventually some crucial dams would have failed. Maybe there was an earthquake or something, and the entire society got wiped out. And that's the legend of Atlantis, is that there was a giant society of, very powerful society, influential, water-faring society of boating people who could then travel out into the sea and go through the Pillars of Hercules and then trade with the people in the Mediterranean. And then maybe this Beaver Dam Atlantis was on the Tamanrasset River Valley. So the Tamanrasset River Valley, here we have Africa. Here we have the Tamanrasset River Valley is huge. Here's the Nile River Valley. Here's the Senegal, the Niger. All these are giant. Here's the Congo River Valley, giant river valleys. This Tamanrasset River Valley is a huge river valley that is south of the Atlas Mountains. So if we look at the Atlas Mountains, okay, I don't know if we're going to be able to see a map. Atlas Mountains, here's the Atlas Mountains, and then here's the Tamanrasset River Valley. So the Atlas Mountains is the mountains that makes the Tamanrasset River Valley. And so then if you are from Greece, like Plato, and you sail out of the Mediterranean along the coastline, because they sailed along the coastline, they wouldn't sail out into the middle, because then you can't see where you're going, you just go in circles. So the way that the seafaring went back in the trireme days of paddling with all these guys is you would go along the coastline. And so then here's the pier, the Pillars of Hercules is where you can see both sides from the boat. So you can sail up the coastline here. You can get to here, and then you can see there. So then you can sail over there because you can see it. It's safe. And then you can sail up the coastline here. And so it was a major shipping landmark in the ancient world because people would always be using this to sail from one side of the Mediterranean on the African coast to the other side of the Mediterranean on the European coast, because you can't navigate any other way than seeing where you're going. So here we can see both. You can be here and see over there. So the legend of Atlantis is that there was a civilization outside of here. And here we have the Atlas Mountains, which is Atlantean, Atlas. That's what the Atlas Mountains is named after. Atlas was the king of Atlantis. So that's the mountain range right there. And then the Tamanrasset River Valley is right here. And then you would sail out here, up the coast, and up that river valley. And then there would be all these beaver dams from here so there'd be beaver dams from here all up and through here. Just nothing but beaver dams everywhere. So many wetlands. Obviously the river would be really wide right here, but you could sail up the river and then you could access all of these regions where there'd be all these wetlands, interconnected wetlands, beaver dams everywhere. So many beaver dams everywhere. And then at one point there was actually even some big lakes in here, something like that. I'm not exactly sure where these big giant lakes are supposed to be. But anyways, if you have all these reservoirs up here in the upper regions, and then one day, you know, you have a disaster and all that water comes pouring down, it might wash out all these beaver dams. And then if that happens, then you would have a mud. All this mud. There'd be so much mud right here. And so then people would come sailing out the Pillars of Hercules, come sailing down, and they wouldn't be able to get into the river because there'd been so much mud everywhere. So then, basically, a part of the story would be that this society was a very powerful society and they had secrets. And one secret was that they were right here. So you should be able to just like walk over there. But they would use armies and make sure you couldn't walk over there. And the reason they would do that is the same reason that people have trade regulations today. So one example of a trade regulation that's really important in the world is the United States has the Jones Act. And the Jones Act is a law that says that the only way you can sail from one U.S. port to another U.S. port with freight is in a U.S. flagged vessel. So if you want to do shipping and run freight from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, the ship has to be flagged in the United States. Now you can flag a ship in more than one country, I'm pretty sure. It's like car registration in that you can have multiple flags. So a shipping company could flag, they could register their ship to work that way, but a U.S. flagged ship is subject to the Merchant Marines Union wages and other safety regulations as well. But in order to be like U.S. flagged, you have to pay everybody union wages, and that raises the price of shipping so much. It's outrageous. So you would never have a U.S. flagged ship go from China to the United States, for example, because it's so much cheaper if you don't have a U.S. flagged ship do that. But the same ship can't go from China to the United States, unload half its cargo, load some cargo on, and then sail over to another U.S. port, because if it's not a U.S. flagged ship, it can't do that because it would be sailing freight from one U.S. port to another. So in order to ensure everyone's job security, they have to unload the entire ship and then load everything onto a U.S. ship, and then that ship can go. Okay, so another example is China had this history of only trading in silver. And this goes way back, right, to the Opium Wars. And so China made a law where they would not accept traded goods. The only type of trade they would accept is silver. They would source all of the raw materials themselves. They would manufacture all of the products themselves, and it was their law that they would only trade out completed goods from China. So like you would get pretty extreme with that one, but the suggestion there is that you can't sell sheets of fabric, you can only sell t-shirts. You can't sell the raw material at all. So goods from China could only be purchased from China, and this is like back in the spice trade days, with silver. They wouldn't accept raw materials, they wouldn't accept any other goods, they wouldn't. So there's this crazy thing, and it's what is cited as causing the Opium Wars in the first place, is that China would not accept any trade of any kind other than you could buy their fully completed products, because those are the most expensive. You can get the highest markup on a completed product, and then they would only accept silver. So you could only bring silver and buy fully completed products, and that was their plan. So what I'm suggesting here for the legend of Beaver Dam Atlantis is that it was a special society because of the beaver dams, but it was a secret society because people would come there and they didn't want any illegal immigrants. They didn't want any people. They were full. They just didn't like anybody coming around. You know what I mean? So they didn't want people to know they could even get there. So they have a secret that they're connected to Africa. So nobody even knows that Atlantis is actually just part of Africa. And one of the ways that they protected their secret, and another part of their secret, was the shipping industry. And they had all these sailors, and everybody was sailing everything, and because there's so much water everywhere, they would be sailing everything, and they'd be just using boats for everything. And they made the most economic stability by people from Atlantis sailing their own boats over to the rest of the world, doing trade, and then coming back up to Atlantis. They didn't want people from this other river valley over here figuring out they could load up a bunch of camels with stuff and walk over there, because they wanted to maintain their pricing. They had nice goods. They didn't want people trying to get around them. So in order to protect that, they had their sailors would go over there and be like, no, you can't get to Atlantis. The only way to get there is by boat. And then people would try to get there by boat, but sure enough, you could get there by boat. But they would do funny things. It was easier for them to keep a secret that way. And then you could sail up and access there. But they would have armies, of course, right over here. And if anybody did show up, they would say, we're not Atlantis. They would take the stuff, which is pretty common. You take the stuff, buy it from them at a price that you can, the price you determine, and say, the only way that this stuff is going this way is if we buy it from you, and we'll take it. And that's what Prince Ali and this 40 Thieves was all about. Okay, so then at some point there was an ecological disaster, and Atlantis was all these beaver dams, And they failed, and the whole thing got wiped out. And then Atlantis was no more. And it was like a single cataclysmic flood that was destructive enough that, yeah, it didn't kill everybody, but never again was there quite the society that there once was. And then those people are the ones who then moved over to Egypt. And so then the people from Atlantis went over to Egypt, and that's one of their Egyptian origin stories. And they brought their knowledge of irrigation, and then stuff like that. Agriculture. So, anyways, I gotta write. I've been typing it in emails and stuff, but I gotta make a blurb that basically summarizes that concept. And I'm gonna call it The Legend of Beaver Dam Atlantis. And there's other people who think that this is Atlantis too, because the eye of the Sahara matches the description to some degree of the ancient city of Atlantis. So the eye of the Sahara is this formation. What a stunning thing that from space it looks exactly like an eye. And here it is. And that's where the Tamanrasset River Valley is. So the Tamanrasset River Valley is like this up here. And so it could be imaginable that this could be like a culture that had a society of, there was people living here, there was water and stuff, beaver dams everywhere, and they would have had a giant mega civilization in the ancient world where that wouldn't even barely be possible. Yeah, so the elevation map. There's the Atlas Mountains, there's the Tamanrasset, and the Eye of the Sahara is like right here. So anyways, that's my video. Thank you very much.